For our classic interview today, we're going back to 2012 when I interviewed Martin Butterick. This is sort of a follow-up to our interview about the impact of casinos to populations in cities and communities that we recently did with Robert Williams. It seems like a great follow-up now to go back to Martin Butterick, who really is going to expand on some of the things Robert Williams alluded to in terms of how the house has an advantage, games, and how casinos have become very, very good at identifying players who are trying to game the systems. We've talked to Lewis about various systems that he has tried and become aware of, and how essentially none of them really work. So we will go back to my interview in February of 2012 with Martin Butterick. Still one of my favorite interviews. Martin Butterick's joining us. He was a professional gambler for 10 years. He also ran a professional gambling team. Martin, I get tons of emails about casinos, about gambling, about the ethics of both running a casino and of being a gambler. I don't even know where to start, but I think a good place is, are there certain casino games where the advantage for the casino is minimized, or is it basically the same across the board?
With craps, if you bet on the correct combination of bets there, you can get the house's advantage down almost to zero.
So when you were a professional gambler, what were your games?
We would primarily play blackjack. That is the one game where the player can get an advantage over the house. And so that was the game that we focused on.
Okay, so explain that, because I think blackjack, in the emails I get, is the one people most seem to think that by using a system or using a method or that there is a way to get an advantage over the house. And I don't understand it, because my understanding is if you tie the house, you actually lose your bet. So how can you take that back mathematically and get the edge back?
Okay, well, there's a lot of information to answer that question, but
yeah.
Kind of in a nutshell, the reason that blackjack is different than all the other games is that the outcome of the next hand is partially determined by the outcome of the last hand. And the reason for that is because the cards that were dealt out during the last hand are no longer available. So if you're playing from a 6-deck shoe, you play a few hands, some cards are gone. Now there's kind of a different deck that you're playing with, as opposed to the one that would be, a 6 full decks. And there are certain situations then where the advantage goes over to the player because of the composition of the deck remaining.
Okay, so are we getting basically into the idea of card counting, keeping track of the cards that have been dealt and kind of keeping a mental tally of what's still left there or not? Is that where you're getting at with this?
Yeah, that's the most common way to use that information, is through card counting. It's kind of the easiest way. It's the more reliable way. But nowadays, it's the one that the casinos are also the most familiar with. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there.
Okay, so how does that work? In other words, number one, what are you really counting when you are card counting? Are you counting face cards? And also, why is that not allowed? And how is it enforceable, especially?
So in card counting, basically what you're doing is you're counting the ratio of high cards to low cards. And so as low cards come out of the deck and the deck becomes more, kind of more weighted towards those tens and aces, the advantage shifts over to the player. And the other way around, if the aces start coming out in greater proportion and there's more little cards left, then the house's advantage tends to go up from there. So the reason that card counting is not allowed is because these casinos are private businesses and they have the right, just like any private business, to refuse service for a customer. 30, 40 years ago, they might have thrown you in jail for card counting. Nowadays, that's not going to happen, but they will ask you just not to play blackjack and allow you to play any of the other games in the casino.
So as casino security has gotten more sophisticated over time, what's the easiest way to spot someone who is card counting? I mean, is it someone who looks pensive? There has to be more to it than that, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, really, they're way more sophisticated now than they used to be. They've gotten down to the thing that matters the most is when a player is raising his bet. And that's how a card counter is going to get his advantage, because you're not going to have the advantage in the majority of hands. It's going to be a minority of times when you have that opportunity. And so to make up for all of the hands where you're playing at a disadvantage, you need to be able to bet a lot more when that opportunity arises. And so with the advent of computers and automated software, casinos are now able to just track a person's betting and see what the advantages that they have on each hand and kind of evaluate them that way.
Okay, and is this done, so in order to do that, does that mean every hand that is being dealt, every player's activity is being tracked by some kind of software, or is it more the dealer's sense of what's going on and maybe getting their supervisor involved to kind of oversee what's happening?
I would say that it's more the latter. It's more likely that the floor supervisor is going to select the individuals that he wants security to kind of focus on. Usually it's going to be the highest bettors, but it could be somebody that if the floorman notices some behavior that looks like a card counter, varying bets when small cards are gone, stuff like that, then they could focus on that person. I think there's just too much going on for the casinos to pay attention to everyone.
So then let's get to the next question, which is, are there so-called systems that are straightforward that do work for someone who says, this is my system? For example, oftentimes people will say, well, here's my system. With blackjack, it's close to 50-50. So this is what I'm told. So what I do is I make one bet, and then if I lose, I double the bet for the next hand. And then if I lose, I double the bet. And then eventually I'm going to win, and I'm going to win bigger. Now, I tried the math on that, and it didn't really seem to work out to me. I mean, how does that sound to you? And are there these so-called systems that the kind of amateur gambler can utilize?
In the long run, none of those types of systems will work. So this type of system, what it does is it allows you to post a win a lot of the time. Usually it's a small win. But then upon occasion, you'll lose 9 bets in a row. And if if you went from 10 to 20 to 40 to 80 to 160 and up from there, I mean, pretty soon you're at 2,000, 3,000 a hand or the table limit, and you just can't recover from it.
That's exactly the numbers that I came up with. So, last thing, in your experience, are casinos best left to just for fun? Is it really just a place to stay away from if your real goal is just to make money?
Yeah, I mean, if your real goal is to try and make money gambling, you need to either learn how to count cards, or one of the other methods that are legitimately give you an advantage. I mean, other games like poker, where you're playing against other opponents, are definitely beatable. Sports betting, if you're really good, you can make some money there as well. It's difficult because the house's edge is pretty big there. But other than that, I think it's just best saying, okay, I'm going to go to Vegas and I've got this much money, and if I lose it, that's fine, and if I win, that's great. I had a good weekend.
Yeah, I think I'm glad my producer took that line of thought a couple of years ago when he just said, you know what, I'm just losing every single time. I think I'm done with it. Martin Butterick, former professional gambler, ran a gambling team. Really great to speak with you today.
Thanks, David.